The moon has always been a mysterious place. It's also a very, very long way away. About the same distance as travelling non-stop around the equator 10 times. Quite a trip if you're planning to visit. Of course, in 1969, I had no idea about statistics like that. I was just an 8-year-old kid living in the country. And when I got together with a couple of mates and we decided to try to beat NASA to the moon, using skyrockets no less, I really thought that we stood a chance. But then, around lunchtime on Monday the 21st of July 1969, I joined 600 million people, about a fifth of the world's population, to witness something truly awe-inspiring. And I realised it'd take much more than skyrockets to achieve anything like it. Here at Pete's Ridge Public School on that amazing, unforgettable day, our headmaster, Mr. Wallace, brought into the classroom something called a television set. We all crowded around. He told everyone to shh. He adjusted the vertical hold, and we looked, and sure enough, unbelievable. There was a man in a funny suit climbing down the ladder of his spacecraft and onto the moon.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Most people still don't realise the vital part Australia played in the historic Apollo 11 moon mission. And if you believe the film The Dish, then you haven't heard the half of it.
Very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
I want to find out the true story of Australia's role in this extraordinary event and why it brought so many people to the verge of tears.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Everything is now ready at Cape Kennedy. Waiting at the Cape is our correspondent Darren Hinch of The Sun.
On July 16th, 1969, Australian journalist Darren Hinch phoned home the biggest news story of his life, the launch of Apollo 11.
In the middle of the night, we were taken to where the astronauts were going to leave their quarters and go to the rocket. And we watched them walk out, the three of them, in their big white outfits and carrying their own life support systems. And their families were there, and some press. And they were giving us a thumbs up as well as they could and smiling through their big bubble heads. They were totally isolated by then in their packs. And then people started to cry and realise the enormity of it. And then they disappeared in a buggy and off they went to the rocket.
And I'll have to admit that when the door to the van closed behind those men, a shiver went down my spine too.
July 16, 1969. The roads were just crammed with people. All around Florida, anywhere near the place, within miles and miles and miles, there was probably 1 million people camping out. They had their barbecues, and they had their caravans, and they had their campers, all of that.
Like all those people, I had no idea that once Apollo 11 blasted into space, Australia would be critical to the mission.
It sounds a long way away. We were about 3 miles away from where the rocket was, for safety reasons apart from anything else. And we were in a sort of a makeshift, almost like a rugby stand, a football stand. And we're sitting there with a little bench over you and your phones on the bench. And we waited, and it was a hell of a hot day. It must have been, in the old terms, about 100 degrees.
30 seconds and counting.
It was just so hot, the telephones were almost too hot to handle. You're all sweating like pigs, and it was absolutely, the excitement just built and built and built.
6, we have the ignition sequence. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and the flames, you can see them now, and she's ready to go. It's starting to move.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
Just this burst of flame, huge flame, smoke everywhere, and it started to lumber aloft. And this is a 36-storey building taking off here. It's like a skyscraper just lumbering up. You think it might even fall over.
The stand that I'm sitting in is shaking. The lights in the stand are shaking, and there it goes. It's incredible. This huge white flame. There's smoke all around this thing. I'll just let you listen for a second to the noise.
Probably came close to using the F word, but it said, "Go, you beauty guys," and it's an absolute beauty. I stumbled, but I didn't swear, and that was it.
Go, you beauty! Go, and here it
I don't think anybody on the tracking station doing this breathed for that last 5 seconds and about the next 10 seconds of the liftoff.
Plus 30 seconds.
And then the world breathed again. Well, at least we thought it was the world. It was everyone we knew anyway. They were just magic days, really.
Mode is a outboard control mode.
I got home that night and I was having a shower. I couldn't work it out. I had these huge black welts, bruises across the tops of my knees. And I realised that's from where they'd been banging up and down under the desk as this noise had hit us. It was absolutely palpable. It was quite extraordinary.
America, for the Apollo programs, employed the best people they could find, and they were prepared to take us and to trust us. You felt you were at the cutting edge of science, of space exploration, of very brave men doing things that no one had ever done before. So, yes, it was exciting.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. You are go at 11. There you go.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
There's an odd parallel between the moon and Australia because it was really an American program. Of course it was. It was President Kennedy who said before the end of the decade we will put a man on the moon. Way, way up there, and yet to do it, they needed Australia way, way, way over there also to help. Apollo 11's flight to the moon was set to take 3 days, just twice the time it took to fly from the USA to Australia back in 1969. So, just like the moon, we were also considered a remote place. With a population of just 12.5 million people, most of the world thought the country was just one big paddock filled with cattle, sheep, wheat and iron ore. But there were also a few devices like these gracing our countryside, and they were about to show everybody that there was more to the land down under than kangaroos, koalas and kookaburras. It wasn't just the Americans who knew so little about this place's involvement in the moon landing. Even most Australians were ignorant of that fact. And I have to admit, my own knowledge could do with some brushing up. So I'm going to talk to some Australians who know the real story of the Apollo 11 mission. And the reason they know is because they were a part of it.
We had 1, 2, 3 antennas. We had our Honeysuckle Creek antenna, we had the Timbanbilla Wingside antenna, and there was the Parkes antenna.
Apollo 11, this is Houston through Carnarvon, over. Houston, Apollo 11, loud and clear, over.
They launched on that big Saturn V, went up and did 1.5, I think, orbits of the Earth, maybe 2. And during that orbital phase, there was some 30 or 40 tracking facilities around the world. It was only when we got on the way to the moon that the stations like Honeysuckle Creek came into their own because they had the larger antennas.
1 minute to LOS Carnarvon, AOS at Honeysuckle, 5.
Honeysuckle was purpose-built for the lunar phases of the Apollo mission. And we had the processing equipment as well as the antennas and transmitting and receiving equipment. The equipment at Tidbinbilla was purpose-installed for Apollo.
Tidbinbilla, by its design, was the best quality station. Honeysuckle was more or less a backup.
But of course we also had Parkes in the system, and really they were brought online when they finally made the decision to have television from the lunar surface.
How important is the role of the Australian stations in this mission? They're extremely important. In fact, Australia is vital to our role because there are only these 3 stations which are going to be able to get data back from the moon.
Getting clear signals down from the moon was an enormous challenge for Australian tracking stations. Picking the best TV picture was somebody else's job.
OTC Paddington is the international gateway for all traffic in and out of Australia. Incorporated on the first floor was NASA's Video Switching Centre, which would be basically a complete television station within that.
Mr. Goodman, what part will these machines play in the whole operation?
Well, the signals from the radio telescope antenna at Parkes will come in here over the Postmaster General's video systems. They'll come through this little panel into these units. They will separate the telemetry and the television. The television will go to the scan converter. The pictures will be sent to ABC for conversion to Australian Standard and to Houston, Texas.
Thousands of technicians around the world have been working for many, many months to ensure that people at home, in front of their own television screens, will receive the highest quality pictures. They will ensure, in fact, that man's first landing on the moon will be the greatest show on Earth.
As a wee 8-year-old, I could happily dream about space travel for hours. But I could tell the grown-ups around me also had down-to-earth issues on their minds. In 1969, growing up on the farm at Peach Ridge, I had a really stable environment. But I had older brothers and sisters heading out into the world, and I was very conscious of unrest, anger, protests, hair growing out long, musicals. Sex was in the air. I had no idea what that was, but I knew it was in the air. Everybody seemed to be talking about it. Vietnam was huge, and people seemed to be very angry a lot of the time.
He who rules the universe rules the world, and he who can fly around the world and spy on anybody and put rockets and missiles and God knows what up there, that country will own the world.
I think all the space business was just part of the Cold War, because once they started putting up satellites, the Russians and America had cameras in every one of them, spying on each other, and so it was just a matter who got control of space first.
There was the fear even till the day before they got there that the Russians were going to land first.
Oh, well, we used to have Russian astronomers visited here, but we had a secret weapon to beat them. They were terrified of these big moths that used to get in the control room. They didn't know whether they'd attack them or not.
We built up to Apollo 11 very quickly. Apollo 8 was in December of 1968. 2 months later, we had Apollo 9. 2 months later, we had Apollo 10.
Things are still falling out up there. What are you doing, throwing everything overboard?
It was a very logical build-up. It was a good technical build-up. But you didn't have time to scratch yourself. There were so many things happening.
Mark, mode 1 Charlie. 1 Charlie.
After building to a 9 million pound thrust, the rocket's first stage, containing the fuel tanks that boosted it from Earth, is jettisoned. The Apollo mission has begun.
Australia had quite an important involvement in what was called the TLI, Translunar Injection rocket burn. And that burn was timed to occur over Australia, and in particular in Carnarvon's view.
We've had signal at Carnarvon.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. You are go for TLI, over. Apollo 11, thank you.
We'll continue to stand by.
When that rocket burns and sends you off to the moon, you got to be damn confident you're going to the moon and not some other obscure place in the solar system.
Now, NASA might have trusted Australia to send the signal that would fire Apollo 11 off towards the moon. But back on the ground, they weren't adverse to pushing tracking station staff to the limit.
The Americans used to put us through some pretty horrendous simulations and so forth and try and make us crack. Very rarely did.
We did that much testing. It was unbelievable. Every day there was test after test after test.
You walked in and listened to us, you wouldn't understand a word we were saying because it was all acronyms. And we're using this language, which is a totally in-house thing. Nobody else would understand a word we were saying.
Receiver 1. Yes, I'll see, taking a multiversal. Okay.
It never fazed me to listen to intercoms and things and 3, 4, 5 different voices come at once and sort out which is the one I deal with now, which is the one I can put aside. That was just pretty natural. You develop abilities to do things that you never thought you would have. One time, in one of the early Apollo simulations, there were 7 simultaneous contingencies. And on the 7th one, I think we said, no more. Fair go.
Relentless testing and simulations may be useful to keep humans on their toes, but Murphy of the dreaded Murphy's Law don't care about that. Like bad weather, he can strike at any time. And as the team at Tidbinbilla discovered, he's even prepared to throw a last-minute spanner in the plans to watch man walk on the moon.
The original plan was for Tidbinbilla to track the lunar module and Honeysuckle to track the command module orbiting the moon.
But the night before we were due to go into the moon phase, the big high tension power supply for the transmitter blew up. It was American equipment. There was nothing in this country even like it. I immediately called Tom Reed over at Honeysuckle, told him what had happened. And the people at Houston said, we have this problem. We don't know how soon we can fix it or even if we can fix it.
If Tidbinbilla remained unusable for the moonwalk, NASA's tracking plans would be thrown into turmoil. Damn Murphy and his stupid law.
Well, on the latest estimates from Honeysuckle Creek Tracking Station near Canberra, the astronauts are 93,250 miles from Earth, and the moon is 146,750 miles ahead.
We used to look up at the sky. We'd be sort of gazing, peering out, seeing if we could see anything whatsoever. And I think the whole thing seemed so unreal to us. But we also felt something of the loneliness of what it must have been like to be 3 men heading for the moon. And it was an oddly kind of communal bond or something with us. I imagine all over the world people were doing exactly what we were doing as 8-year-olds, thinking, I hope they'll be okay.
11, this is Houston. We're not reading you at the present time. You're way down in the noise level. Stand by, please.
Without the tracking stations, we wouldn't have known what was going on. And we feel just as important as Houston and the spacecraft, really. We knew that we were a very important link in the chain to keep the communications up.
The transmitter here at Tidbinbilla had a major fire in the antenna transmitter here, and they moved heaven and earth and spent 2 days rebuilding everything.
There isn't a magnet mart just down the road to go and buy a few spare fuses and globes at. You're on your own. But I had working here a rather marvellous fellow. He was a supervising technician named Alan Blake. He had a certain degree of claustrophobia, hated to get into confined spaces. And he went inside the power supply for that transmitter. And how he did it with his level of claustrophobia, I won't know to this day. He worked close to 16 hours straight, and he rebuilt that auto transformer. At Houston, they had lights for every tracking station around the world, and we went from red to green. Everything else on the board was green except us, and suddenly there we were with them.
But Houston said, well, you know, they've had a major problem, something could happen. We'll give Honeysuckle the lunar module, and we'll give Timbinbilla the command module.
Which was sensible, because if you looked at it in terms of risk, we could have blown again.
They were much more concerned about reliability and repeatability of results than they were about the ultimate bit of technology. You've only got to look at the computers that they used to navigate and do a whole lot of other things in the command module and lunar modules. You'd have infinitely more capability in your mobile phone these days than those computers.
Well, the PC now, it does fantastic things, right? There was no way we had anything like that. It was 12 years before the PC came on the scene.
You could never have put up an automated tracking station that would do the things that the ground stations did for Apollo.
Human is the most flexible computer we've still got, and can be reprogrammed instantly, and you should never make your life dependent on a computer.
Apollo 11 is due to go into orbit around the moon on Sunday morning at 3:26 Eastern Australian time.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. All your systems are looking good going around the corner. We'll see you on the other side. Over. Roger. And we've had loss of signal as Apollo 11 goes behind the moon.
They had to fire a motor to slow themselves down to go into lunar orbit. They could have overburnt and crashed onto the lunar surface, underburnt and zipped off into space. It was incredibly tense. Every single one of them, I think, that orbited the moon said how forbidding and dark and awful sort of looking place it was.
You always waited, you know, try and pick it up. Where are we going to get it? Have they survived?
Columbia, Houston, over. Houston, Columbia, reading you loud and clear. How many?
A lot of people would have felt a lot of elation about that. But again, this is the busiest time. You don't have time to really stop and consider these things. You're trying to configure all the equipment to get the best possible data, best possible voice, send the commands. Everything's happening just in that moment when they come out from behind the moon.
Listen, Dave, everything's going just swimmingly. Beautiful.
So far, so good. Leaving Earth, getting into the orbit of the moon, everything had worked pretty much like, dare I say, rocket science. But what about actually landing on the moon? What about that then? Could that be done? Could humans survive a trip to another world?
Go for landing. Eagle, Houston, you're go for landing, over. Roger, understand. Go for landing. 3,000 feet.
All the time there's danger, and I think we flirt a little bit with danger. We sort of assume so positive that nothing will happen. You can get like that. It's a bit like driving down a highway, you know. But as you get older, you start to think, hey, things can happen here.
Despite all they knew about the moon at the time and all the other unmanned spacecraft that had flown around it, they couldn't be absolutely certain of what would happen to that lunar excursion module when it landed on the surface. Would it land with 1 foot up on a rock and be tilted and they could never ever get it right and you'd lose all communication with it?
How you doing, Control? 35 degrees. Good, you're fine. How about you, 35 degrees, 750, coming down to 23.
At one stage, there was fears that the whole thing would be talcum powder and the whole lot would just disappear.
100 feet, down at 19.
The lunar module had no spare margin in fuel, landing fuel.
540 feet, down at 30.
As Armstrong was coming in to land, he recognised that if he just let the computer take him where it wanted to, he would end up landing in a field of boulders. And so he started to maneuver sideways to cross this area. Well, this was all consuming fuel at a fiendish rate.
30 seconds.
We were all hanging on to their loudspeakers or earphones, listening to what was going on, sweating that they would land successfully.
Just as they were contemplating that they might have to abort the whole thing, he actually got down and landed.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop. ATA at a D10. We copy you down, Eagle. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Originally, the flight plan called for them to have a sleep after they landed and before they got out.
Why will Armstrong wait in the moon module for 10 hours before venturing out onto the moon's surface?
These men are under, obviously, severe psychological stress. And the doctors, Dr. Berry, in fact, feels that this is necessary.
To me, that was, how on earth could you expect people who just landed on the moon to go to sleep for a while and then wake up refreshed and rejuvenated?
Neil Armstrong, reporting from Tranquility Base, stated that EVA preparations are now underway.
Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin decided they were going to get out of the LEM early. We received warning probably several hours before they actually started to suit up that they were going to come out early. So that meant we would probably be in view when they did that.
Band 2 is configured to set 4 p.m.
As a consequence of Armstrong deciding to go early, it seemed that Parkes would miss out, because at that point the moon was still well below the horizon.
Parkes, who were designed to do the television, have got this 30-degree elevation limit, and the Earth rotates 15 degrees an hour, so with a 30-degree elevation limit, they were about 2 hours before they could see the moon, whereas we could see it 2 hours before them, if you like.
Houston, this is Neil, radio check. Neil, this is Houston, loud and clear. Break. Buzz, this is Houston, radio check and verify TV circuit breaker in.
Well, it all moved forward. It was all beyond our control. It was all moving to us, right, and we really had to focus.
Right in the middle of this thick tension, the Prime Minister of Australia, John Gorton, arrives.
Yes, this was unexpected from our point of view. I don't know whether the station director knew about it or not, but we were all busy preparing our equipment, and suddenly we all had to stand to attention as the Prime Minister came past with his entourage. And I was a station photographer, so I was detailed to follow him around with a camera. I had to drop everything to do that.
Well, I asked them what all the little wiggly green lines were and what the various noises coming out of bits and pieces of the equipment were, and got answers which I wouldn't pretend thoroughly to understand. I think perhaps the best way of saying what I felt when I was in there was that I was blinded by science.
A preview of humanity's greatest adventure to get to know the Earth's only satellite, which will see a team of Americans become immortalized in the annals of space exploration. A feat of which they will get photographic proof before leaving equipment able to transmit data.
They had quite a fight in Houston about whether they were going to have television at all. There was only one or two of the astronauts who were in favour of it. All the rest of them said, no, it's a needless hazard and a problem.
Chris Kraft, who was in charge of operations at Houston at the time, obviously recognised that the PR and the image content, the totality of the impact of the mission demanded the television.
Already done that pretty well. Pretty well complete. Locked in, double locked.
To us, television wasn't the important signal. Far more important to us was the medical and the engineering data that was coming down. That was critical. The television was an aside.
The astronauts had heart and respiration monitors on their bodies, and then the backpack itself had all sorts of data about oxygen pressures and temperatures and everything else. came down to either honeysuckle or Tibumbilla, depending upon what spacecraft we were monitoring. So all that data was highly important for astronaut safety. And probably the busiest man on the station was a fellow called Kevin Gallegos.
All the switching to everything, going up and coming down, happened in the area that I worked in. They were monitoring their heartbeats, their temperatures, and all those personal, individual parameters.
Whilst they were preparing to exit the lunar module, in other words, while they were putting on the suits and the like, I was getting reports from the telemetry area of the station saying the EKGs, electrocardiographs, the heart monitor of the astronauts, was dropping in and out. The signal was dropping in and out. In situations like that, you've got to try and decide if the problem is in your own equipment or it's coming down from the spacecraft.
Okay, at LOS, the EKGs dropped right out. Out? Yeah, and they came back in. Are they good now? The baseline's still wandering.
At the time, my concern for that was 100 times bigger than the television signal. It eventually went away.
VSO2 host to right hand, PGA connector locked. Let me do that for you.
Everything had been rehearsed, everything had been tested.
They had systems, they had backup systems. Even a place like Parkes Radio Telescope had been put here specifically because it was among the lowest levels of wind on the entire eastern seaboard of Australia. Surely nothing now could go wrong.
What are the chances of a breakdown, of a technical breakdown during this critical time?
We have a number of 100 to 1 chances and a number of 1,000 to 1 chances. All these have been backed up. Perhaps our biggest weakness is the weather. If we get a very severe storm and very high winds, then we'd no longer be able to keep tracking. But this period of the year is the best we have for this kind of situation at Parkes.
Well, my role was just to point the dish at the certain point on the moon and have the voltmeter on top of the desk so we could see what the strength of the signal we were getting.
Well, I was the foreman mechanic, that's all. Just look after the mechanical stuff and assist with the installation and maintenance.
My role was the electrician to look after the main supply of the telescope.
We're there sitting around waiting for the moon to rise over the horizon. We could see it in the sky at that stage, but the telescope couldn't see it. And next thing, a great weather front came through.
This horrible squall came in from the back, from the western side, as they started to tip the dish to try and lock onto the moon.
Whoosh, this wind just blew up.
Oh dear, not a very pleasant sight.
If the wind goes more than 30 miles an hour, you can't be below 30 degrees. The telescope's got to be stowed.
If we obeyed the rules, we've got to just break off the track and stow the dish and put it up on jacks.
You know, there's some things you've got control over and some things you haven't. Well, there's no sense in starting to panic that I did.
The whole structure seemed to be rattling and rumbling, you know. We were all looking at each other, what do we do now, sort of thing, yeah. What's going to happen, you know.
The walls had been strengthened and they had these strain gauges around so that you could, by reading those, you could tell how the tower was being distorted by the wind.
Our boss, John Bolton, the director, said, "Oh, this has only happened once. We can't turn around and say, no, we can't do it."
I think the astronauts were just about to step on the moon at that time.
Neil, this is Houston. What's your status on hatch opening? Over. The hatch is coming open.
So we just ignored the wind restrictions and sat there and waited for the moon to rise.
Columbia, this is Houston. 1 minute, 30 seconds LOS. All systems go. Over.
We're now realising what's going to happen as a culmination of all the training, a sense of achievement. But, you know, you better make sure we get it right and that there's no stuff-ups, you know, because we'll be branded for life if we stuff this up.
Okay, now I'm going to check here.
You've got to make damn sure that you are doing your bit, and equally then you trust and hope and are confident others are doing their bit.
We were very worried about our equipment behaving, not failing. And I remember standing there and I was aware of the tension in the air. Everybody was hunched over their equipment. That was you could actually feel it. I had goosebumps on my arms at what was coming up.
Everybody, be it Sydney Video or be it Kevin Gallagher, everybody knew their role was to get the best signal from the best place at the time, and it mattered not a damn where that was so.
And because Neil Armstrong decided to take his first footstep early, tracking stations in both Australia and America could now pick up Apollo 11's transmissions from the moon. So there were 3 antennas on Earth ready to take the picture from the moon.
And of course, it was meant to be the American one, Goldstone, to really put it out there to the world. Unfortunately, there was a junior burger TV technician at work that day who made something of an error.
It took the combined effort of over 400,000 people to get Apollo 11 to the moon. And now, the big moment had finally arrived. The whole world was watching to see if John F. Kennedy's dream of putting a man onto the surface of our nearest cosmic neighbour could actually be achieved.
Okay, Houston, I'm on the porch. Roger, Neil. Tranquility Base, this is Houston. We request you open the TV circuit breaker at the present time. Over. And we're getting a picture on the TV. You had a good picture, huh? There's a great deal of contrast in it, and currently it's upside down on our monitor, but we can make out a fair amount of detail.
I always felt for the video tech at Goldstone in the Mojave Desert when he was a prime site for the video for the American networks, and we hear things like the video's upside down when you switch to reverse on, and the contrast is all wrong, and you know, I thought, oh my God.
Goldstone Video, Houston TV. Goldstone Video, go ahead. Can you confirm that your reverse switch is in the proper position for the camera being upside down? Stand by, we will go to the reverse position. We are in reverse. Roger, thank you.
It was a nightmare. The video tech at Goldstone I don't know if he's still alive.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. Neil, we can see you coming.
Nobody could simulate in advance what those pictures were going to be like. That was the one thing we could not simulate. Ed, who was running the video console, did an excellent job of tweaking the TV signal and doing better than people on the other side of the world could do. And in the end, Houston took our signals.
All stations, we have just switched video to honeysuckle. Stand by.
The most amazing thing of that period is how quiet the net was. Normally it was continuous chit-chat, but everybody was focused on watching what was happening.
As Armstrong came down the ladder, a lot of people wanted to see it. And so there was various people taking off down to the video section, and then operations realised then that this could become a disaster.
I'll leave it to your discretion. You can release one man at a time to go and look at that TV if they want. Richard, thank you very much. Just for a few minutes, stand back. Richard.
I think there was a lot of excitement on the station. There was a lot of people came clustering around the consoles trying to take a look at this happening. We hadn't probably anticipated that, and we had a little bit of a problem with overcrowding in the operations area.
Okay, I just checked, getting back up to that first step. That isn't collapsed too far, but it's adequate to get back up.
For my own part, I hate to sound rather down about this, but I didn't get a chance to really look at it at all. There was so much else going on that we needed to keep an eye on and to worry about.
Just remember, we're technicians, and we had to just concentrate on our area, not to get too enthusiastic about it. It wasn't like the civilian population, because they were all huddled around TV sets. We actually rigged up our oscilloscopes, and I could actually see the landing occurring on my oscilloscope in green and black. It was black and green first, and I had to reverse it.
It wasn't until the television came on, perhaps, that I began to think, well, maybe they really are up there and doing that stuff.
I'm at the foot of the ladder. The LEM footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches. Although the surface
As he clambered down the ladder, he then stood on the footpad, and there was that moment when he put his foot on the lunar surface itself. What was it like? What was it going to be like? What was going to happen?
I'm going to step off the LEM now.
You didn't breathe. You knew these people were coming down. You didn't know what their fate was going to be.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Virtually the whole of Australia was in front of a TV set, either at home or in the street, watching in shop windows as this incredible event unfolded. This was actually men walking and talking on the surface of the moon, and people were absolutely mesmerised by it. It was amazing.
Just I couldn't explain, something fantastic, wonderful, but no words can tell. I don't know. Very emotional inside. I can't explain.
People were just overawed, and they were very emotional. I mean, I remember talking to a couple of people who were fighting back tears at what they'd just seen.
You seem a little bit stunned. Has it made you
feel?
Yes,
I was stunned. Yes, that's what it is. I was stunned. It didn't really dawn on me that it was happening.
It's just something beyond comprehension. Something that is really very hard to follow.
Yes, the surface is fine and powdery. I can pick it up loosely with my toe.
I'm just flabbergasted by Armstrong. Here he was on top of this huge rocket, biggest rocket ever known to man. And his heartbeat is 84 beats a minute. Talk about a man of steel. But when he stepped onto the lunar surface, he was doing 112 beats a minute, which showed, I don't think it was the exertion, although there was probably some of that involved, but it was probably excitement. I don't blame him.
Oh, that looks beautiful from here, Neil. It has a stark beauty all its own. It's like much of the high desert of the United States. It's different, but it's very pretty out here.
You know, this is it. It doesn't get much better. You know, I'm involved in something of this magnitude. Little old me from country Toowoomba. You know, it's hard to imagine.
Are you getting a TV picture now, Houston? Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture.
We all lived that moment with the astronauts. We all could see what was happening. Even though it may have been a bit fuzzy, we could still see the lunar surface, we could see the astronauts, and it was just a fantastic feeling of, wow, we're actually walking on the moon and we can actually see it.
As 600 million people across the planet huddled in front of televisions, watching humankind's first footsteps on another world, staff at Parkes Observatory watched the clock, counting the seconds until the moon would finally rise into view of their dish. The wind continued banging and bashing the huge metal sail above their heads, but there was to be no turning back now. On this extraordinary day, there was no doubt the show must go on.
As the time arrived, to receive the signal, and the telescope was tipped over to its maximum extent, and the wind just got stronger and stronger. John Bolton, who's running the show, was keeping his eyes on the motor currents.
My boss, Tom Reed, was sitting in what we call the Ops 1 position at that time. Tom starts asking, what's the signal from Parkes looking like? Because I had reported to Tom that Parkes was now on their main beam and we should be getting a good signal from them.
Where's the signal from Parkes?
We're getting the same between last and that one, the decom point.
And it so happened that we were able to get through it.
Houston TV, City Video.
This Houston TV, go ahead.
Please be advised I have a very good picture from Parkes. Shall I give it to you?
Roger.
You have it.
Roger, beautiful picture, thank you. We're switching to Parkes at this time.
And everything just went smoothly from then. And that's when I went downstairs to have a bit of a walk around and look at the TV myself.
I couldn't actually, because I was tied up at the dish and do the wrong thingy and leave the controls to try and see what's going on over there. And you wouldn't know what happened to you.
Right, you might pass on to the Parkes people if their labor was not in vain. They've given us the best TV yet.
Everybody who was alive at the time that watched it remembers those pictures. It's the most requested news clip of all time, those fuzzy pictures.
Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like
We had the President going up to both spacecraft, bit of a complicated communication setup for me.
Would be an honor. Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
I was not happy about that at all. I thought these politicians shouldn't get involved in it, even though they are providing the money. But nevertheless, I wrote down Nixon uplinking in my log.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done.
And I remember walking outside and then seeing the moon above the antenna, looking at the kangaroos eating grass around me, and looking through the window into the USB room and seeing the astronauts on the moon. And I thought how lucky I am to be at the forefront of human endeavours, and I'm in the Australian bush.
Here, men from the planet Earth, first set foot upon the moon, July 1969, ET. It came in peace for all mankind.
It stands out for me because it was a good news story, not only history in the making, but it made everybody happy.
Number one. Yeah, without a doubt, number one.
I think just for those, it was probably more than just a second, it was probably just some minutes while that was happening. The whole world could look at it and say, we're part of the creation which is good enough to do that. It's mankind is something that if there is a God, or if it's a dozen gods, or it's just some evolutionary process coming out of a primordial soup, mankind is an incredible being, a thinking being, one with courage, ingenuity, and you are proud to be part of the human race.
Green hatch is closed and latched. And you're cleared for takeoff.
It is a masterly achievement of science and technology to be able to put someone up there and physically walk around and, would you believe, bring them back, which is very, very important. Don't leave them up there because the food chain is very poor up there.
1,000 feet high, 80 feet per second vertical rise. Very quiet rise. There's that one crater on there.
The Apollo 11 mission is a defining moment in my life because it is obviously the highest point in my whole life, career, whatever you like to call it, everything. It is the moment where I felt part of one of humankind's biggest achievements.
I was so hooked on this space business and getting everything right that I suddenly realised after about 5 or 6 years that my kids were a lot older than I thought they were. It's just sad in some ways that men do tend to get tied up in their jobs and they do miss their families growing up. But I just happened to score one of the best jobs there was around at the time, and there was no way that I would pass up any of that.
Airballs Hornet, what's the present condition of the astronauts?
Our condition is all three excellent. We're just fine. Take your time.
All right.
I felt it was a privilege to be at the centre and focus of such an enormous achievement. And to know that we'd played a significant part. It wasn't a minor part, it was a significant part, and that we'd stood up and been counted and had done what was expected of us.
And we salute you all for that. You certainly gave me a childhood memory that remains special to this very day. I wasn't just a naive 8-year-old. I'd seen some pretty good shows in my time. I'd been to the Royal Easter Show, I'd been to Luna Park, I'd even been to the Moscow Circus. But I had never seen a show like this. And I never will again.
You know, look at the stars. And, yeah, it's a good thing to instill in kids. Don't look down at your shoes, look at the stars, you know, start dreaming.
I reckoned I probably wouldn't get under any viaducts I came to or overhead bridges because I was about 25 feet tall. That's how I felt after Apollo 11. Enormous. I was up in the stars. I had walked with gods and I'd held my place, and so had all my troops. And so I was one of the proudest men in the world. And I will be till the day I die. I think we did well.
This way.